Tonight's program, which is going to be co-taught by Rabbi Haskel Lookstein and Rabbi Joshua Lookstein, a historical moment certainly for Ramaz, and on Zoom I don't think it's ever been done before, so it has a double part of a history making. The evening's lecture is going to be the rabbis. They're going to explore classical and modern interpretations of Simcha in good times and bad. And it is sponsored this evening, first and foremost, by the Lookstein Grandchildren, all of them, Baruch Hashem, many, and too many to mention each name, but in honor of two of their greatest religious and personal role models we love learning from and with you. And then also it is being sponsored by Dana and Matthew Hiltzik, both of the class of 90, in memory of Joel Kaufman, a beloved uncle and great uncle, and Yael Schulman and Shlomi Peretz, in memory of Yael's beloved grandparents, Sue and Daniel Schulman, and finally by Judith Tanz, in memory of Syma Goldenberg. Once again, we ask anyone that has not yet made their gift to the Ramaz Annual Day of Giving to please consider any level gift to help in supporting us. It's a very, very wonderful opportunity to show your love and support for Ramaz today. So please, before the end of the evening, you can join us in doing that. And now I hand over the evening to the rabbis, Haskel and Rabbi Joshua Lookstein. Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much, Kenny. It's very meaningful to Rabbi Josh and me that we have a chance to do this together. I'm going to be depending on my son to be the, in addition to being a teacher here, but to being the technical expert. And I'm going to ask him to share the screen so I can start with the first source.
So just everyone should know, this is what it means that the rabbis Lookstein are co-teaching. Rabbi Haskel Lookstein will be teaching, and Rabbi Josh Lookstein will be doing the tech. That's only slightly a joke. But as I'm doing that, I also want to, sorry to do this on Ramaz evening, but Yael and Shlomi Peretz, who are co-sponsoring, are also Westchester Day School parents of an amazing, amazing child. And it's a complete surprise to me that they were co-sponsoring. So thank you.
Hooray for Westchester Day School.
Okay.
Okay, here we are. This particular part of the session is all about Simcha. As a matter of fact, the whole co-teaching will be about Simcha. So I'm going to get right into it. The Tur, who was the forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch. On the basis of the Tur, the Shulchan Aruch was organized. The Tur starts out his discussion of Sukkah, quoting the Chumash, Basukot teshavu shivat yamim. And for a 7-day period you shall live in Sukkot, in order that your ensuing generations should know that I had the children of Israel live in booths when I took them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. The verse, says the Tur, links the commandment of building a sukkah with the exodus from Egypt. Talaha katuv mitzvat sukkah bitziat Mitzrayim. Actually, what the Tur says is that this is one of the mitzvot that highlights how the Jewish people survived following the exodus from Egypt. And the Tur continues on and discusses why Yetziat Mitzrayim is so fundamental to Judaism, because it is the best proof that God cares, that God is a providential God who takes care of us and worries about us and is concerned about us. In all of Jewish history, we have one event principally, which was witnessed by over 2 million people, and Jews. And that event is Yetziat Mitzrayim, and Sukkot is a mitzvah, the Sukkah is a mitzvah to remember how we survived in the wilderness after God took us out of Egypt. Now, if we can go down to the second source, you will see the Bach, the Bayit Chadash, a commentary on the Tur. Actually, for our family, he is a particularly important commentary because I am actually descended from the Bach, Rabbi Joel Sirkis from Poland. There's another famous commentary, and that's the Taz, the Turei Zahav of David Halevi, who's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch itself. And my wife, Audrey, is descended from the Taz. When we told this to Josh before he was Rabbi Josh, he said, "You mean I'm descended from both of them?" The answer is absolutely yes, descended from both of them. Well, here is the Bach, and the Bach says, on the words Talaha Katuv, Mitzvat Sukkah B'Yetziat Mitzrayim, that the verse in the Torah bases the mitzvah of Sukkah on the exodus from Egypt, the Bach says something very significant. I don't have the English, so I'm going to just read it in Hebrew. Ikala Meidak, one can infer from this, B'divrei Rabbeinu, from the words of our teacher, she'ein ze midarko b'chiburo ze leva'er kavana l'shum mikra shebatorah. Our teacher, the Tur, who never discusses the reasons for Torah mitzvos in his book, the Tur, ki lo ba rak lifsok hora'ah o lahorot minhag, because his function in the Tur is just to give the final decision of Torah Shebechsav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, the written and oral law. What are the laws and what are the customs, the minhagim, and not to do anything more. Upo, but here, he'erich leva'er v'lidrosh hamikra de basukot teshvu. Here he went to great lengths to discuss what is involved in the mitzvah of you shall dwell in the Sukkot for 7 days. V'yir'eh li lomar, says the Bach, it would appear to me, Bozeh, shesover, that the Tur feels, the Tur is Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, dechivan dechsiv laman yedeu dorosechem, since it says your ensuing generations should know that I had the children of Israel live in booths when I took them out of the land of Egypt. And he stresses the purpose of the mitzvah is education, to remind this future generations and teach them God's providence. Lo kiyem ha-mitzvah ketikuna, a person has not fulfilled the mitzvah properly. Im lo yada kavanat mitzvat hasukah, unless he understands or she understands properly the purpose of this mitzvah. In other words, it's not, if you want to fulfill normal mitzvahs, let's say like lulav, what you have to do is pick up a lulav in an esrog with hadassim and haravos. You don't have to know why there's a mitzvah of lulav. You just pick it up, and that fulfills the mitzvah. If you want to put up a mezuzah on your door, you put the mezuzah on your doorpost. You don't have to know why the mezuzah is there. You don't even have to really know what's inside the mezuzah. If you put it up on the doorpost, you fulfill the mitzvah. Most mitzvot are like that. Not sukkah. You have to, apparently, according to the Torah, Lama'an yedu'u dorosechem. The purpose of this mitzvah is that future generations should know that this is a zecher liyetzias Mitzrayim. V'lachein be'er lefi pshat, and that's why the Torah goes to great lengths to explain the pshat of this pasuk. The ikar hakavana b'yeshivat hasukah sheyizkor yetziat Mitzrayim. The fundamental purpose of sitting in a sukkah is to remember God's providence in the Exodus from Egypt. Now, when I learned with Rav Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, he said the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema requires special kavanah. It's not enough to just say Shema and realize you're fulfilling a mitzvah. You have to realize when you say Shema that you're accepting upon yourself the kingship of God. Kabbalat ol malchut shamayim. Similarly, in prayer, when you daven Shmona Esrei, it's not enough to realize I'm davening Shmona Esrei. You have to have in mind Amidah lifnei Hashem, that you're standing before God. And if you don't have that in mind, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, you really haven't prayed at all. So I asked Rav Soloveitchik, is the Bach saying that the Torah feels that the mitzvah of Sukkah is like Shema and Shmona Esrei? It requires special kavanah in order to fulfill the mitzvah. It's not enough just to sit in the sukkah or eat in the sukkah. You got to know why you're doing it. And the Rav said, I believe that's exactly what the Bach is saying. It's a mitzvah like Shema and Shmona Esrei. So the pshat of you shall sit in the sukkah for 7 days, the pshat is L'man yedu dorosechem, that you have to understand that the purpose of this mitzvah is to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's on a pshat level. On a drash level, thinking about what's going on in this mitzvah of Sukkah, which is Zman Simchateinu, the festival of our joy, I would like to explore with you why Sukkah is the first mitzvah in Zman Simchateinu. What is Simcha as understood in the observance of the mitzvah of Sukkah, and why it comes in the shadow of Yom Kippur? What does Sukkah have to teach us about Simcha, happiness, harvest, celebration, and joy? And I'd like to suggest that there are 3 lessons or messages in the Sukkah as concerning Simcha. First message: at the moment of greatest joy, one must retain balance. Our Simcha must not overwhelm us. At the season of opulence, we leave our comfortable homes and sit crowded, not in a COVID year, but in a normal year, crowded in a flimsy, vulnerable structure with a thatched roof, and still have the capacity to remain happy. Philo of Alexandria put it this way: it is well in wealth to remember your poverty, in distinction your insignificance. In high office, your position as a commoner. In peace, your dangers in war. On land, the storms on sea. In cities, the life of loneliness. My God, what was he thinking about? For there is no pleasure greater than in high prosperity to call to mind old misfortunes. But besides giving pleasure, it is considerable help in the practice of virtue. Balance in life. Some of you know that I love to quote a Gemara in Brachos at the bottom of page 30b, which describes Mar Berei de Ravina, a great Amora, a sage, who made a wedding for his son. And he noticed that the guests at the wedding were dancing too frenetically. Have you ever seen that at a Jewish wedding? Where people are flying around, standing up on tables, and doing all kinds of things? Well, that was going on there in Babylonia. And Mar Berei de Ravina did not like it. So he took a vase worth 400 zuz. That's twice the value of a ksuba, which is 200 zuz. And he threw it on the floor, and it smashed, and the people got serious. And Tosfos, at the top of the next page, 31a, one line, Tosfos says, this is the source for breaking a glass at a wedding. What's the message? The message is never get too high. Never lose your perspective. Recognize that in life there are going to be highs and lows. There's going to be happiness and joy. There's going to be frivolity and mourning. And understand that even at a wedding. It's not all da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's also serious. Balance. That's the first lesson of Sukkah. In the harvest, get out of your very comfortable home and go into a Sukkah and recognize that you can be happy in a Sukkah as well. Second message, our Simcha must be shared. The Sukkah is not a place to rejoice as narcissists. Jewish tradition has taught us, as Rabbi Reuven Bulka of Ottawa, Canada, where I now have a granddaughter and grandson and great-granddaughter, Nina Emunah, my youngest great-grandchild. Rabbi Bulka, who was the rabbi of their synagogue, now emeritus, for decades, here's what he said about this thought of sharing at the moment of harvest. To share the joy and to experience the joy of sharing. He was actually referring to a passage in the Rambam. Maimonides states this very clearly in his Code of Jewish Law, which you have right before you. This is Hilchos Yom Tov, toward the very end of the discussion of how you're supposed to observe Yom Tov. And he talks about the Simcha of Yom Tov. And he says at the top, Ketzad, how? And then he says, for example, the children should be given parched grain, nuts, and sweetmeats, things they can sort of play with. The women should be presented with pretty clothes and trinkets according to one's means. The menfolk should eat meat and drink wine, for there is no real rejoicing without the use of meat and wine. All things that make people happy, he's just referred to. And then he adds, Ucheshehu ochel v'shoteh. But when he eats and drinks, chayav laha'achil, he also has to give food. Lager, layatom, v'la'almanah, im sha'ar ha'aniyim ha'umlalim. He must feed the stranger, the orphan, the widow, and other poor unfortunates. Anyone, however, who locks the doors of his courtyard and eats and drinks along with his wife and children without giving anything to eat and drink to the poor and the desperate, does not observe a religious celebration. Ein zo simchas mitzvah, elo simchas kreso. He's indulging in the celebration of his stomach. That's the Rambam saying that there's no such thing as joy, a mitzvah joy, without sharing it with those who don't have joy and who don't have all of the things of the harvest that we, thank God, have. And in source number 4, the Rambam references Purim, where there is a Su'udah, a big meal, and Mishloach Manot, sending food gifts to our friends. But of course, there's a third thing, Matanot la'evyonim, charity to the poor. And the Rambam says at the very end of Hilchot Megillah, Mutav la'adam laharbot b'matnot evyonim milaharbot b'seudato uv'shiluach manot l'reyav. One should rather spend more money on gifts to the poor than on his Purim banquet and presents to his friends. For no joy is greater and more glorious than the joy of gladdening the hearts of the poor, the orphans, the widows, and the strangers. He who gladdens the heart of these unhappy people imitates God, as it is written, Lahachayot ruach shvalim, I, God, revive the spirit of the humble, Ulahachayot lev nidkaim, and put heart into the crushed. So, by the way, the famous Reb Chaim Tzanzer, a very great Hasidic rabbi who was known for his poverty, but also his hachnasat orchim, his hospitality, particularly to the poor. And on the first night of Sukkot, when he came with a friend to his Reb Chaim's sukkah, he walked through the door and there was this bare sukkah with a whole entourage of poor people sitting around the table. And the friend looked at the bare sukkah with no decorations and said to Reb Chaim, where are your noye sukkah? Where are your decorations? And Reb Chaim answered, look around you. These are my noye sukkah. These are the decorations of my sukkah. So I do want to say it's an honor for me to be giving, together with my son, a shiur on Simcha, Zman Simchateinu, and to make this point about the joy of sharing and the sharing in one's joy, as Rabbi Bulka put it, and to be doing it on a Ramaz giving day. And I have to say, nothing makes me more proud than to know that my grandchildren, Audrey's and my grandchildren, made a contribution to Ramaz to sponsor this program, this shiur, in honor of Rabbi Josh and me. But you know what? They cost me money, because when I saw the headline there, that they were sponsoring it in memory of us, not in memory, thank God, not yet. In honor of us, I wrote them a note and I said, darn it, you cost me money because Grandma and I are going to give $1,000 to Ramaz to help it reach its goal. And you're the ones who stimulated us to do this. So thank you to my dear grandchildren, and thank you to my children for having taught my grandchildren to react this way. Finally, I have to give my son a chance to teach here too, before you all start leaving. I have a third message. And the third message, let's do a little bit of review as the Rav would do. First message is that the purpose of Sukkah is fundamentally to remember the Exodus. And if you don't do that when you go into the Sukkah, it's a question whether the Torah would give you credit for going into the Sukkah. You have to have that in mind in order to be Yotzei the mitzvah. Then on the subject of Simcha, the first message of the Sukkah for Simcha is balance. The second is the joy of sharing. And a third message is, at harvest time, a person may be tempted to take himself or herself very seriously. Look at what I have amassed. Look at what I have achieved. So the Rambam reminds us at the end of Hilchot Lulav, and Rabbi Josh, if you'll give us source number 5, the Rambam reminds us to be very careful with our Simchas Mitzvah, not to take ourselves overly seriously. Hasimcha sheyismach Adam ba'asiyat ha-mitzvah u'ba'avat ha'kel shetzivah bahen avodah gedolahi. It's great. It's a great service to God to enjoy doing a mitzvah. It's one of the things we're supposed to do. But now go down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line after the close quote. V'chol ha-megis da'ato. However, thank you for the cursor. Anyone who is arrogant, v'cholei kavod la'atzmo, and insists upon glory and honor to himself, u'miskabed be'einav, and is full of it, okay? Bimkomot elu, when he's doing a mitzvah, choteh, he's a sinner, v'shoteh, and he's a fool. V'alzeh is here Shlomo v'yomar, and this is what King Solomon warned us about in Proverbs. Al tithadar lifnei melech. Don't glorify yourself in the presence of the king. On the other hand, however, anyone who humbles himself on such occasions is indeed great and honored, for he serves the Lord out of love and not out of self-righteousness. One has to be humble in one's service of God. It's the same humility and sense of inadequacy that we experienced on Yom Kippur. But on Yom Kippur, it was felt in tshuva and slicha, when we were praying for our lives and for forgiveness. Al tavo b'mishpati manu, saying to God, don't come to us out of law, because because nobody is going to be a righteous person before you. We have humility. We understand our limitations. But that same feeling on Sukkot, this humility is felt in Simcha, in a harvest, after the Slicha and Mechila of Yom Kippur, as we enter the Sukkah, the shaky, flimsy, vulnerable hut. So let's sum up. On a pshat level, Sukkah reminds us of God's goodness in protecting us after Yetziat Mitzrayim, and may very well be a necessary prerequisite for fulfilling the mitzvah, the awareness of this. On a drash level, Sukkah teaches us how to be happy in our harvest when things are good. We have to be able to practice balance, and we have to balance our good fortune with our misfortunes. Did we ever need a lesson like that in a year like this, when we absolutely have to live with balance and understand it's never all up. Sometimes it's all down. Secondly, rejoicing through sharing our harvest with others and having the joy of sharing. And third, retaining our humility in the way we celebrate and in the way in which we express our hakarat hatov, our gratitude to God for all of our blessings. There's more to say about Simcha on Sukkot, and I turn it over to my colleague, younger colleague, and thank God, son, Rabbi Josh. Rabbi Josh, wake up for heaven's sakes.
Thank you. Thank you for both the passing it to me and for waking me up. There are a lot of things that are going through my mind right now. I'm going to try to teach, and maybe I'll come back to a little bit of my father, and then actually when I'm finished, I'm going to pass it back to my father. It's interesting. There's a Ramaz graduate who moved to Westchester, and he was my student when I was at Ramaz, and he keeps calling me Rabbi Josh, which when I came to Westchester Day School, I thought maybe I would be called Rabbi Josh because that's what I was always called, but I was Rabbi Lookstein. And so it's been really nice to hear Rabbi Josh again. So I went through my files, and I looked through all the different shiurim that I've given over the years on Sukkot, and I found one piece of lined yellow paper, and it was some kind of Dvar Torah. I can't tell you who I heard it from. The idea was all of the different these chagim and how on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot, they all have elements of representing our personal weakness and our personal strength. And for Sukkot, the example that was given was for our personal weakness was the Sukkah itself represents a flimsy structure or our own weakness. And interestingly, the strength was represented by going back to our homes after Sukkot. That we don't live in Sukkot all year round. We live in Sukkot for the holiday of Sukkot, and then we go back into our homes. Being in a Sukkah is our weakness. Going back into our homes is a strength. And it was fascinating because it sort of never occurred to me. I mean, obviously it did, however long ago I heard this Torah, but it hasn't occurred to me in a long time that part of Sukkot is the juxtaposition of the Sukkah and our homes, and how we don't stay in a Sukkah, we go back into our homes. I started wondering sort of what more that represented. And as I spoke to my father about the concept of Simcha, it occurred to me that going back to our homes also has an element of Simcha in it. And I think it's connected to two halachot Sukkot. And I'm going to sort of quickly run through these sources. The first is about the Arba Minim in source number 1, taken from Vayikra. Ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon pri eitz hadar. Everyone knows this. This is not new. But the Gemara, you take the Arba Minim on Sukkot. The Gemara in Masachet Sukkah, first the Mishnah, says on this, Ein Adam Yotze Yedei Chovato Biyom Tov Harishon Belulavo Shel Chavero. On the first day, you are not Yotze, you do not fulfill the mitzvah of Lulav and Etrog with the Lulav of your friend. Usha'ar Yemot HaChag Adam Yotze Yedei Chovato Belulavo Shel Chavero. But the other days of Sukkot, you do fulfill the mitzvah. You can fulfill the mitzvah by using someone else's lulav and etrog. The Gemara continues, Menahani Mili, from where do we know this? Titana Rabbanan, Ulakachtem, Shetehei Lekicha Biyad Kol Echad Ve'echad, that everyone has to take a lulav and etrog, and Lachem Mishalachem, Lahotzi et ha'sha'ul v'et ha'gazul. That it has to not just be that you have one, not that you take one, but you have to have one. It has to be yours. It can't be a borrowed or a stolen lulav and etrog. So in order to fulfill the mitzvah on the first day, mitzvah of Daled Minim, on the first day of Sukkot, you have to own the lulav and the etrog. That's halacha 1. And halacha 2, people are also familiar with it. It's not esoteric. In Devarim, Perek Tet Zayin, Pasuk Yud Gimel, Chag HaSukkot ta'aseh lecha shivat yamim ve'aspacha migarnecha u'miyifecha, that you shall celebrate. Really, you shall make Chag HaSukkot. Should be 7 days. And the Gemara says on the word make, if you look, you continue, this is the last source. Ve'od tanya gabe sukkah ta'aseh velo min ha'asui. You have to make a sukkah. It can't be something that has already been made. You have to make it yourself. You have to make it. It can't be prefab to a certain extent. And it continues and gives an example, less important. Mikan amru hidla aleh et hagefen v'et hadalaat v'et hakisos v'sichech al gaban psula. If, as the English says, if one trellised a grapevine, a gourd plant, or ivy over a sukkah while still attached to the ground, and then he added roofing atop the vine, the sukkah is unfit, because there basically is already a pre-existing roof. And this is the source for why we don't leave our sukkah up all year round and just sit in it again from year to year, because you're not yotze the mitzvah of sukkah if you are eating and living in a sukkah that is already made. You have to do it yourself. So the question is sort of obvious. Why? Right, why is it that you are not yotze the mitzvah of Daled Minim on the first day with a borrowed Daled Minim? Why do you have to own it? And why do you have to build a sukkah from scratch? I think the answer, getting back to the idea of simcha, is because the mitzvah on Sukkot is simcha. And there is simcha, there is happiness in ownership, or ownership brings simcha. Now, we're familiar with this concept in the science or the art of leadership. It's a team building concept. It's more effective for a leader to solicit feedback, to give team members a role in whatever the goal is, rather than presenting an idea as a fait accompli. It gives them ownership. It gets buy-in. We always want people to take ownership, because when a person is involved in building something, in owning something, the happiness flows from the sense of accomplishment and investment and ownership. When Georgie and I moved to Scarsdale almost 8 years ago, we rented for the first 2 years. And then we thought about buying. And I had one friend who said, don't buy, just continue to rent. And everyone else said, buy. Now, in hindsight, financially, my one friend may have been right because of the financial issues involved in ownership. But emotionally, he was wrong and everyone else was right. Because there is something about ownership. There is something in sort of pride of ownership that brings one a certain joy to be able to look at what you have and to be able to invest in what you have. That gives one a sense of happiness. What does it mean to build a home? Right? We give the bracha to a young couple, a married couple. We say, may you be zoche to build a bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael. We don't say, may you be zoche to happen upon a bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael, or to borrow, may you be zoche to borrow a bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael. What we really mean is we want them to build, because when they build, there's a sense of accomplishment. Taking ownership of what happens, of educating one's children, of inculcating values, religious values and ethical values, there is a sense of simcha, of fulfillment that comes from that. Owning the Arba Minim creates a certain pride that brings happiness. Building the sukkah creates a pride that brings happiness. We go back into our homes after Sukkot and we recommit to building our homes. The real work begins or resumes of fostering the connection to God without the need for an ephemeral structure to remind us. And if we accomplish that, then we have that kind of happiness, a fourth kind of happiness, the one that comes from accomplishment, ownership, and fulfillment. Tonight, I feel a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment for a few reasons. One is there is a little bit of closure tonight. I don't know how many of you would remember this, but way back when this all started, March 3rd was the day that Westchester Day School was one of the first 3 schools to close because of coronavirus. I was supposed to come Tuesday night, March 3rd, and give a pre-Purim shir to Ramaz Alumni. And in the end, that never happened because the decision was made, if we're closing our school, then something must be up. And we decided not to go ahead with it. And it's amazing to think back how many months ago that was, and to think of how the world has changed, but really also a sense of accomplishment of everything that has been accomplished. And you know, my father has done this so many times. He has sort of transformed his in-person teaching and the impact he has on people in person to this impact that he's had on people through Zoom. And that's something that did not happen before. And that's something that I believe will probably continue long after, God willing, this time period and this crisis is over. So I do feel like there's a sense of accomplishment and something that we should be grateful for. And also just simply, I feel a very strong sense of simcha to be on the same, to be teaching in the same venue and to be sort of called Rabbis Lookstein and not just to be watching my father teach, but that's a sense of pride to be able to teach alongside of my father. So I want to thank Ramaz for giving me this opportunity. It is one that I certainly will remember for a very long time, even on Zoom. And with that, I will hand it back to my father to close. We're gonna unmute you.
And we are going to close because there's a limit to how much fun you can have and how much joy and simcha you can have, especially in a medium where people can just leave and you don't see them walking out. They just press the button, leave. Matter of fact, my leave button just came up in red. So I think maybe that's a suggestion. So I'm going to end very quickly with an idea of Rav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Cook on the subject of Sukkot Shalom, the Sukkah of peace. We pray, Ufros Aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha. God, spread over it your Sukkah of peace. Spread over us your Sukkah of peace. And Rav Cook asks, how come we speak about a Sukkot Shalom? We don't speak about a Lulav Shalom or Tefillin Shalom. We say Shabbat Shalom, but what's about Sukkah and Shalom? And Rav Cook gave a fascinating answer. You all remember Rav Cook was the first chief rabbi of Palestine. He said there's a strange thing about the mitzvah of Sukkah that is very different from all other mitzvot. The Sukkah does not require perfection. You don't need 4 walls to a Sukkah. You need 2 walls and a piece. The walls don't have to touch the bottom, the earth. They have to come near the bottom. The walls can even tip a little bit. Dofen akuma. It doesn't have to be absolutely straight. That's not true with lulav or tefillin. If there is some kind of blemish in the tefillin are puzzle. You can't use them. If in tomorrow's or tonight's Ma'ariv Shmona Esrei, you leave out Yael v'Yovo, the Shmona Esrei doesn't work. It has to be whole. Next week, if you leave out Mashiv Haruach Umorid Hagoshem, there's no Shmona Esrei. But a sukkah doesn't have to be perfect. And Rav Cook said, that's why we associate shalom with sukkah, because you can't have shalom without tolerance of imperfection. Anywhere you want to have shalom bayis, peace in your home, you have to be tolerant of imperfection in your spouse, in your children, in your siblings. You want to have a state of Israel, you have to be accepting of the fact that Israel isn't going to be perfect. It may be fantastic, but it's going to be imperfect. And that's the only way to get to shalom. Rav Cook puts it this way, HaShalom hu kol kach yakar, peace is so precious, v'chol kach chiyuni, and it's so healthy, shegam im lo nitan lahasigo b'shleimuto, even if you can't achieve full peace, ra'oi lehishtadel lahasigo, you should try to get it, gam b'tzura chelkit, even in a partial way. Gam im yihiyeh bivchinat sukkah, even if it's only a sukkah. You know, We're heading into an election in the United States, and we are so polarized that never before have I experienced anything like this. You all know this. You cannot sit at a table with friends, let alone family, and discuss politics. It becomes raucous. It becomes very tense. We have to stop that. We have to start listening to each other. We have to start to understand that we can love people with whom we may disagree, even disagree strongly, because nobody is perfect, certainly not we ourselves. And therefore, if you want to have a Sukkot Shalom, make the peace like a sukkah, just a little bit imperfect. And then we will have a peaceful society. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, however it turns out on November the 3rd, we will have a peaceful America. Moadim l'simcha, hagim uzmanim l'sason, and may we all enjoy Sukkot Shlomecha.